Okay, well, thank you, Willie. I appreciate. My name is Dan. I'm an alcoholic, and I appreciate that. Yeah, as Willie had said yesterday, through the grace of God and the program of AA, I celebrated 38 years sobriety, um, and yeah, I don't forget because Thanksgiving always brings me back to gratitude because it was in 1987. My last day out there was a Thanksgiving day, and I was in very bad shape. And next morning, which started my sobriety journey, I wound up in a homeless shelter in Garrison, New York, Graymore, completely bankrupt, financially, spiritually, emotionally. I was destroyed, and I had no idea how I would ever recover. Hadn't seen my children in over a year. Um, and pretty much in 1987, I pretty much spent most of the year on the streets. Um, it didn't start out that way. I mean, I was a typical guy. Grew up in Woodside, Queens. My father is was born in Ireland. My mother was born in Scotland. My father was 58 years old when I was born, and when I was pretty young, he was still drinking. He was causing havoc in the household, terrorizing us really. Um, and to top it off, then my parents sent me down to a Catholic grammar school, and then the nuns terrorized me for 8 years. So, but growing up, even though I went through that, I thought all families were like that, and I pretty much just went about my business. One thing that I had going for me was I was a very good athlete, and I got a lot of my self worth from that. And pretty much growing up, that's what I did. I think I had my first drink probably around 12 or 13 years old. I drank with some friends a pint of Gallo red wine and got sick as you could possibly imagine. They dragged me home, left me in the hallway. I lived in an apartment building, and my mother had it came up. So, and the only thing I learned from that was that I shouldn't drink red wine. That's all I thought. And I was ready to do it again. So throughout, I don't want to go through a whole drunkalog, but throughout my teenage years, it was all about sports, partying on the weekend, sex, rock and roll. I'm 73 now. Back this was like the late 60s going into the 70s. And that's all I knew. That's what everybody I knew did. We hung out, we lived for the weekends, and we drank and partied. And I won't say that every time I drank, I got in trouble, but every time I got in trouble, I had been drinking. That was for sure. And of course, during that time was all the other assorted cousins that go with it, all the other drugs that probably many of us have done. Um, but I went to high school, played high school baseball, and so forth. And then when I left high school, I decided not to go to college, and I just wound up took a year off, and there was a lot of insanity, a lot of some juvenile delinquent stuff and things like that. But the only thing I learned from that was not to get caught. Is the only thing I really thought about it. I never associated it with alcohol. I never knew about, which I eventually would learn about, the rapacious creditor that was really feeding me a lot of great times, but would come back and take them all back 100 times over. Um, but I had a lot of fun getting high. I really did. And truthfully, if the consequences didn't occur, I'd probably still be doing it. But boy, did the consequences come. So quickly through that, the teenage years are just like many of ours, all drinking and all that type of stuff. But I did graduate high school. And after a year of hanging out, I went to Wall Street. My friend got me a job down in Wall Street in the early 70s. And my boss in the first week there took me to the bar, and I was like, this is awesome. So, it was like understood you could drink. Now, I used to drink, but I could still, I wasn't drunk every day. But usually when I did drink, it was, I wouldn't stop. But I could get up and I could go to work. I was a hard worker. I would out hustle anybody. At the time, there was certain things going on in Wall Street. They needed somebody to show up early to pick up reports, and I decided to do that. So all through the 70s, just raced through those years, I moved up the ladder in Wall Street. Now there was many and many a blackout, many a night I found myself in Manhattan going into places I should never go into. I wound up meeting my wife in a bar. We had 3 children in 4 years, and it was just, and she drank with me and partied with me and everything like that. So All sorts of, just like we all go through. There'd be nights I wouldn't come home. And down in Wall Street, as I got promoted and moved up the ladder, I was given access to cab vouchers. Okay. So the cab vouchers allowed you to call for a cab to get home. So I could be totally blitzed down in Wall Street in one of the bars and call for a cab and get myself home. Half the time I wouldn't even remember how I got home. We were very, very busy. Mergers were going on, and I got introduced to a lot of amphetamine and things like that would keep me awake all day. And I became like a chemist. I would keep myself up drinking, and then I would bring myself down at night. So that's how years of that went on. Uh, I always used to like to say, too, my life is like a meter. In the beginning, it was 95% fun, 5% trouble. And that meter went along the lines to maybe 30% trouble. Even at 50% trouble, 50% fun, I could live with that. It wasn't that bad. Little did I know, it just doesn't get any better. And if you're an alcoholic like I am, it just gets worse and worse. It never gets better. So eventually, it just got worse and worse and worse. There's a million stories. I'm not going to bore you with them. Got to the point though where me and my wife were fighting and this and that, and it just wasn't working anymore between me and my wife. She didn't like the fact that I didn't come home. So what happened was we eventually got separated. A million crazy stories in there. I'm not going to go through them. And I wound up moving out, and I moved back with my mother, and I was like in my 30s now. So I went through many, many years. But the drinking was getting worse now. Now I was drinking like scotch, no ice, and really blackout type of drinking that was going on, and trouble was happening. People were saying to me down in work, "Do you know what you did last night? Do you know what you said?" And I'd be like, "No." "Was it good?" And they'd be like, "No, it wasn't good. You cursed at the boss, you took a swing at somebody." And this was what was starting to happen to me. So, but I thought I could control it. I could stop when I wanted. I could control it. Just like that meter went, the control meter went too, where I used to have 50% control. Now the control was slipping away, and I was starting to get nervous. So I wound up, as I said, separated from my wife. I had a big, big episode with my kids. My wife still was my wife. We were going through separation. She got involved with a neighbor, and I went over there drunk out of my mind. My kids were up at the house, and I smashed his door down with a baseball bat, screaming and yelling, terrorizing my children. I really had become my father, is what had really happened. And that incident scared the heck out of me. So I eventually, actually, my ex-wife's mother was in the program, and her partner at the time took me to my first AA meeting. And I went to an AA meeting, and I was like, I got it. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. I don't need to do what they're all talking about, but I'm not going to drink. So, and I went to, whatever it was, 90 meetings. And then I tried to get my wife back, and she was like, drop dead. I don't want you back. And I was like, it's the only reason I really went to AA. And everybody was happy to see me back at the bar. And the insanity just started picking up worse than ever. I got a job as a bartender on the weekend. I met this young lady. We got involved. She happened to be a drug dealer. She introduced me to cocaine, smoking, and freebasing, and all that type of stuff. And I was like out of my mind. I had moved out now and gotten my own apartment with a friend, and it was just going nuts. It was just getting really, really bad. Around the clock type of stuff. There was days that I woke up one morning and I thought it was the morning. It was like kind of dark, or getting dark, or it was dark. Then I went to the train station to go to work, and I realized it was nighttime. I had slept all day. So, and people in work were starting to say, I had been promoted too, believe it or not. And I was a manager. People were saying to me, Dan, what's wrong with you? You're losing weight, you're this and that. And I'm like, I'm working out. That's what I'm telling these people. Now, I was the type of person, I would do my laundry, I would put my clothes on the bed, I would take a shirt, and I would just iron this part of the shirt, the front of my shirt, and put a jacket on top of me. I couldn't even iron the rest of the shirt or the rest of the thing. And buttons were falling off. So it just got really, really terrible. It was a nightmare. I wound up going to my EAP counselor. I thought I had a drug problem. And he said, I think you're an alcoholic. You know, you're of Irish descent. You probably are. And they sent me out to Brunswick House, which was a rehab. And I went there and I started hearing about, you know, don't pick up the first drink, do all these type of stuff, the big book and this and that. And I left there after 28 days and I said, I got this. I'm not going to pick up a drink. I'm not buying the book. It's too big. I don't need the book. I'll just do it. And we know the story. 3 weeks later, I was with a girl and I went to the South Sea Seaport. She ordered some wine. I had a glass of wine, white wine. And next thing I know, I was back down on the corner chasing drugs and drinking. And it got to the point of January 1987. I started bouncing checks, and I got to the point where I needed to either quit drinking or quit my job. So I got a bonus check, and I decided to quit my job. I walked out of my job, and I bounced my rent check, and I headed to the streets. It was January of 1987, and literally stopped paying child support, stopped seeing my family. And the meter now was really down low. And that's where I stayed. I met a friend who used to do deliveries. He had a van. I helped him do a delivery. He had air mattresses, and I got the air mattresses, and he let me sleep in his van. And I was like, my mind was deteriorating, and I was like, this is not that bad. You know what? I have an air mattress. I have a place to sleep. I can get a shower every couple of days. It's not that bad. And you know what? Then the city confiscated his van for parking tickets. And I was like, can you believe this? They just evicted me. And then after that, it was just nonstop. I was living on rooftops, under bridges. I was like, how did this happen to me? I was a manager in Wall Street like 2 years ago, playing ball. I'd stopped everything, and it was a nightmare. So not even to bore you with all the running out of restaurants, doing all that nonsense, I wound up, it was November. I called my mother. I had robbed my mother. I had robbed people. I begged her to let me in. She said, you can only get in if you go to a rehab to get help. And so, and I can remember I slept the night there, even leaving that morning, getting into a cab to go to a detox. The demons were calling me, but I made it. I got to a detox and I stayed there. And this was that November of 87. And when I left there, I went up to Graymoor, and I walked up that hill to Graymoor. They make you strip down and they delouse you with powder. And I'm like, how did this happen to me? And then this is just a homeless shelter, not a rehab. So, and then basically up there, they give you jobs like cleaning toilets, doing this type of things. And here I was in a room with like 90 bunk beds, and majority people didn't look like me that were there. Not that that matters, but you know, I was like, how the hell did I get here? Not all of them wanted to get recovery either. But up there, I decided to go to a chapel to pray. And I heard the story of Zacchaeus, which is when Jesus is walking into the town and he looks up in the tree and he sees Zacchaeus and he says, Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. I want to enter into your home. And at that moment, a wind went through me and I was startled. I thought it might be an acid kickback or something. But I have never picked up a drink since that moment. I was blown away, and I decided, I went to the brother and I asked him what to do. He gave me a Bible to read. I started reading that. I started reading a big book. I went to AA meetings up there, and I heard a guy say, I bet you feel like losers out there. And I felt like a loser. Like, how did this happen to me? He said, you're not a loser. You're just losing today. And if you get on the AA team, you could change your life. And I said, I like that. I decided at that point I would do anything I needed to do to save my life. I spent 7 weeks in that shelter, 6 weeks in a rehab. I could have went home after that, but I didn't. I went to a halfway house, and I lived in a halfway house for 9 months. And I had to take antabuse. I didn't care. It was one of those, you could go out at night. You just had to be back, you know. I got involved in a home group. I got a sponsor. I started going to meetings like crazy. I started reading the big book. After that period of time, my friend got me a job as a doorman, and I worked in as a doorman for 5 years on 20 East 74th Street. And I had time to read. I read everything about AA that you could possibly read. Dr. Bob and the Good Old Times, all of this, everything. And everything that they did to recover, I was going to do. Got into the steps, surrounded myself with people who wanted to be recovered. I was going to this bookstore down the block. It was called the Paraclete. And I'm ordering books like John of the Cross, Thomas Merton, all of these books. And the woman goes, "Are you a priest?" Because I'm ordering all these books. I said, "No, I'm the doorman down the block." So, but I got so involved in AA and the recovery, Joe and Charlie tapes, going to conferences, going to AA meetings. I made coffee in 3 or 4 groups. I'd be there. We had double headers back then. Back then, they actually had smoking on one side of the room. You know, you could smoke on this side, not on that side, so you could put ashtrays away. But I became obsessed. And, people used to say to me, "Did you get hit in the Bible? What happened to you?" And I'd be like, "You know what? I don't know what happened to me, but I love it." And I started sponsoring people. And this has been going on for 38 years. I'm now in my home group right now. I'm the treasurer. We meet every day at 12 o'clock. I'm there early, stay late. I probably make 5 or 6 meetings a week. Depends on, you got to make sure you have a life too. You just do something. Now, in the meantime, I got sober. I became active in real estate. I opened my own company. I followed like Napoleon Hill, and I built a business that I sold. I became very successful, but I did everything on integrity, honesty, and doing the right thing by people. I'm a firm believer that the way we stay sober is help other people. That's the way we stay sober. Now, I also found that along the way, because at first it was like, I knew I had a problem. The doctor's opinion explained it. I knew they said you had come to believe that a power greater than myself. So I made the decision to take that third step and do everything. I'll finish up quickly. And I'll do the third step, take the third step to do the rest of the steps. And I discovered something that I have coined. It's called spiritual cholesterol. And that's the stuff that's in us that blocks us, because they tell us on page 55 that the only place you'll find God is deep within you. Why wasn't I finding that God? It's because I was blocked spiritually. I had to get rid of resentments. I had to get rid of anger. I had to get rid of lust. I had to get rid of just money, greed, all of those things. And when I got rid of those things, all of a sudden God awoken in me. And when he does that, I made amends to all the people I could possibly make amends to. And now I live in the 10, 11, and 12. And my wife will tell you, she shared at the meeting yesterday, I know he does the steps. He's definitely in step 10 because he's constantly admitting he's wrong, just not promptly enough, she said. So, but that's what it's all about. I love AA. I love the people in AA. And my mission I look at it as my ministry, is to help other people stay sober. And when Willie asked me to speak, I said, absolutely, love it. So anybody who's new, you're not a loser. You're just losing today. Get on board, do the right thing, and everything will be great. So that's enough out of me. Thank you very much.